Hey everybody, it's the Commodore from the Clan of the Grey Wolf, and you are watching the weekly Wringer series here on clanofthegraywolf.com. So we've got a lot going on this week. I've got to wrap up a question that was really fairly open, and maybe even too open, about the state of video games that I've got to somehow find out how to wrap up in a very short amount of time, which I will do. So yeah, I want to look back at some of the things that you guys have said about the question from last week about the state of video games coming out of E3. Then I'm going to give you my thoughts, as I always do, on the question from last week. And then I thought about it a little bit, and I thought the E3 talk might be a little bit overwhelming at this point, so I figured I'd ask about something else. In the spirit of, with Duke Nukem Forever being out now and a really strong force, wanted to ask you guys a question about sequels, and that's what we'll talk about for next week. So, before we get started, I want to say something that is just driving me giddy at this particular point in time. I actually just got out the old PlayStation, an original PlayStation, not a PS1, but as in the rebranded PS1 ONE, but an original PlayStation. I plugged it in, I put a controller on it, and I put a game disc in it and fired it up, and the thing just booted automatically, no problems whatsoever. That just blows my mind. So, very excited at the moment that the old hardware still works the way that it should. I was just willing to bet that something was going to be... I mean, I have a Super Nintendo that doesn't even work anymore. So I thought there's no way that the PlayStation would work. But lo and behold, it boots up like a dream. Now I got to see what's going to happen with that. So I don't know, just an interesting thought. I know at one point we had talked about doing, Rue is doing the 16-bit gems, and I've always really been more of the PlayStation marked a departure for me in games, and I really got connected in a really major way into the whole gaming universe out there and the culture. And so for me, we always talked about maybe doing a few videos about some of the games from the 32-bit generation and beyond. So I don't know. I'm not saying that's going to happen. Just saying, with my PlayStation booting up, I was literally just overtaken with glee, and I was just so excited to be able to throw in Castlevania Symphony of the Night, or actually what I did was I watched the introduction to Chrono Cross, and after seeing that again, now I feel like I need to be playing some of those old games all over again, guys. So maybe we'll talk about some of those games in the very near future. All right, so let's get back into the Weekly Wringer from last week. I asked about coming out of E3, and we all know about the news and the noise that was made by E3 this year. The question that I asked you about was, how do you feel about the state of video games now that we've come through E3? Where are we, and maybe what is the work of the next kind of years the next few years going to look like for video games after seeing E3. A lot of good responses. I think a lot of you were saying basically, man, this is almost way too much to possibly answer in one comment. Very sensitive to that. Many of you probably didn't even try because there's so much going on with that question. But excuse me, there was some really good things said that I want to highlight from the community before I get into my thoughts of where the industry is and what I feel like the movement in the future is going to be like. DJB123, one great thing that was said is that PC gaming is indeed not dead. Very good observation. I couldn't agree more. One of the things that has come to light over the past few years, Gabe Newell from Valve, who is probably, if they aren't the greatest developer in the world, they've got to be in the top 2 or 3, right? Valve is just a tremendous developer. Gabe Newell has really said that one of the big reasons that people have the perception that PC gaming is dead is because of the way that charts get drawn up and downloads get tallied and things like that, so on and so forth. And I think he's absolutely right. PC gaming actually is fairly healthy. Does that mean it's as healthy as console gaming? Of course not. No, it's not. I can just tell you that right now. Lots of people have PCs, but not nearly as many people use their PCs for gaming purposes, at least not for things like AAA titles that we would think of in the video game space. They probably do use them for other things like Farmville and other casual games like that, but that being said, the state of PC gaming seems to be better than what I would have maybe prognosticated about 2 or 3 years ago. So, great point. Mr. Kettleman talked about the death of the polygon wars with this generation. Man, I think you're absolutely right. And I alluded to this last week. I think this is absolutely the last generation of video game consoles to be fighting about who has the better graphics. Not necessarily who has the most powerful hardware, because things are going to shift back now into other things. Not who can make things pretty, but who can make things prettiest, the longest, with the most going on, right? That is a different story, right? Because, think about it, guys. The first time that you play a first-person shooter with 3D graphics, and I don't even remember what that game was for me, but in any case, might have been Tribes, I'm not sure. You go, wow, this is really cool. You know, I can see this area, but then I go back and play it, and I realize, man, there's not a lot of detail going on here. There's just kind of the space of the Earth, which has a very short draw distance. Everything else is 2D, and then you have kind of little representations of the figures off in the distance. And again, the draw distance is very, very short. You have a very small area that you're actually able to look at that is in 3D. And then you go and play something like, say, you know, Serious Sam, which I love, by the way. Serious Sam's a fantastic game, one of my favorite FPSs of all time. And you have just thousands, what it feels like thousands, but it's really not. It's just, it might be hundreds, but it just feels like thousands of these just enemies running out of everywhere at you from all different directions. And, you know, to not see any stutter, lag, Z-fighting, any of that kind of stuff while you're playing makes something like Tribes look ridiculous, right? Because you have all of this going on at the same time, and the draw distance is a lot more impressive, so on and so forth. Think of the first time you saw a great 3D game where you could see very far into the distance, and it was all 3D, and it wasn't, you know, the draw distance was actually amazingly large. That stuff was really cool. But that being said, guys, I think that's a different argument, and what Mr. Kettleman's talking about is that the polygon wars are over. It's no longer about who can make the prettiest game. And by the way, when I say prettiest, I mean the most realistic graphics. Not prettiest in terms of pretty stylistic, because pretty in terms of stylistic could be anything. And I think we've seen that a lot in terms of this video game generation as well. One of the games that I'm really getting back into is Mirror's Edge, which I thought got a very bad rap. I think it's a very good game. Sometimes the control scheme hurts your brain, and it's a little bit like playing Prince of Persia sometimes, in that you have no idea why, because of the input that you've put in, that the character isn't doing what you're envisioning. So it's a little maddening from that perspective, but it's a game that does a tremendous job of style. The style in Mirror's Edge is undeniably cool, and it's not even the most super realistic game in terms of its looks. It just gets the style right, and I think that's fantastic. Look at some of the Zelda games that are not trying to make more and more realistic graphics, but trying to make a real Zelda experience. I think they're doing a great job of that. So hopefully, I think this generation, with any luck, will be the generation where the polygon wars are over. I also wanted to say for GRA 007, the state of video games might look good, and I think almost all of you put that there. You might have had some negative things to say or some positive things to say. But GRA 007 said that it's a little bit, coming off of E3 and everything that we've seen, it's a little bit like we're stuck, a little too stuck maybe, in the familiar. In the things that we've all known from before, that are just being done in a little bit of a different scale, or quite frankly being rehashed a little too much. And I think I agree with that. There is a tremendous amount of innovation going into the gaming universe and world right now, but there's also a lot of repetition, and there's also a lot of rehashing, and there's also a lot of cash cows that are just kind of being pumped out, right? Milked as much as we possibly can. So being stuck in the familiar, I think, is a great concept, and one that I wanted to highlight there. I think it's a great observation. Have two new folks to welcome to the community as well. I have Nashvar and Kado, and I wanted to say something about Kado, who brought up something really cool, and that is that one of the reasons we are where we are in video gaming now is because we have to justify a $60 gaming experience, at least with the Polygon Wars and the kind of hardcore AAA titles that we all know and love. So, not that every video game costs $60, especially even when it first launches, depending on what system you buy it on, so on and so forth. But the point is, we live in a $60 experience world where every game that gets made needs to justify that experience. I thought that was a good conversation point to jump off of, and they went there. New business models need to be developed in order to kind of justify the changes that have gone through in the industry, because there have been a lot of changes. That's one thing I think that many of you have talked about. There have been a lot of changes, but the one thing I think that Kado really points out is that we continue to operate with old models, even with the new experiences that our video game systems and software provide us. I think that's a really insightful comment. What do those experiences look like? What does the gaming world look like if we somehow are able to better cater toward the critical mass of the video game world right now? Here's what I think we can say about it. And someone talked about being at the top of the roller coaster. Couldn't agree more. What I would say about that is this. We're at a point now where the $60 experience with these gaming consoles, they're making a lot more money on a per game basis because of that reason, and they feel like it's justified because now maybe you bought your Xbox, but you probably bought it a good couple of years ago. Now maybe you got a PS3 Slim, or you got a brand new one of the new black Xboxes with the Kinect functionality built in. Maybe you did, but the point is, you probably didn't buy your hardware last week. And if you did, you're probably buying it for Kinect, or you're buying it for some of the newer, maybe some of the newer games that just came out, or whatever the case might be. But the point is, most people out there have already bought the system that they're going to stick with, and the fact is that they would probably feel more justified dropping $60 on a game because they didn't just buy a console as well, right? And I think that's only natural. That's why the attach rates are so low with Wii, and they're so high with other consoles. I think people are interested in making that initial purchase, but then when they get a little bit down the line, then they can really justify spending $60. Okay, I can justify spending $60 on this. But my question is, moving off of that, and I think Kado's question was very similar, is what do we do that doesn't justify that $60 experience? Duke Nukem Forever might be a good example for that. I haven't played it, but let's say it doesn't justify a $60 experience. I think there are a lot of people that would probably disagree, just because it's number one in almost all the sales charts starting last week. But the point is, think of where is the critical mass of $60. What defines how that works? And we've seen a lot of changes in the industry in that regard, along the lines of the downloadable content, so on and so forth, where a game gets developed that probably didn't need the kind of effort that a AAA title did. And so to be able to lower the cost of that to the consumer makes a lot of sense. In any case, I think with the Kinect, I think with the Wii U looking forward, PlayStation Move, all of these other kinds of things